Welcome to Uniting the Cults. So here I'm trying to explain to some people the difference between an argument and a question. And I'm going to be explaining why it's important too. If it wasn't important, I wouldn't be making a video about it. So an ex-Muslim asks, how do I debunk this argument? They said, I remember my parents always telling me that the Quran is the word of Allah and that Muhammad didn't make it up. Basically, they say that if Muhammad made up the Quran, why would we talk bad about himself? Why would he talk bad about himself? What they're mentioning is Surah Abasa, Quran 80, where it talks about the time Muhammad saw a blind man and he frowned when the blind man passed him. I think this argument is pretty weak, but I'd like to get help from you guys. So I replied, it's not an argument. That's a question. And just not putting the question mark doesn't make it not a question. Tell us the argument and then maybe we can help you. Or maybe I already helped you by telling you that you didn't present an argument and all you did was present a question. Because that's really how he should have replied to the Muslim that said this to him. It doesn't make sense to call it a weak argument. It's not even an argument. It was just a question. I mean, we can guess what they were thinking, hidden, we can guess why people ask questions. But if they don't actually make an argument, we shouldn't treat it as an argument. Aside from that, there's no such thing as a weak or strong argument. Arguments are either correct or incorrect. If you don't believe me, consider this. What's the point of calling an argument weak if it's correct, or strong if it's incorrect? And they said, sorry, what I meant is that by saying my parents argue that if Muhammad made up the Quran, he wouldn't write bad things about Islam, about himself, which would mean that Allah wrote the Quran and not Muhammad. Basically, the Quran talks bad about Muhammad because he looked at a blind man while frowning, which must mean that Allah wrote it, because Muhammad wouldn't talk bad about himself. Basically, it's a weak attempt to justify the Quran is right. I said, that's one theory to explain this, but how do you know it's right? Have you considered rival theories? How did they rule out the rival theories? And they said, nope, obviously they wouldn't. They just blindly follow Islamic scholars and never open their mind to other arguments or criticism because Satan would encourage them to doubt their faith. So I say, okay, so that's my argument against their argument. They didn't explain why their argument, actually it's just an unargued claim or just a question. They didn't explain why it's right or better than rival arguments.